My name is Penelope, and I'm 28 years old now, living a comfortable life that once seemed impossible. When I was 13, my parents abandoned me, choosing drugs over their only daughter. Thankfully, my Uncle William took me in despite our awkward beginning. Today, I'm standing in his lawyer's office for the reading of his will when the impossible happens. My parents, gone for 15 years, walk through the door, eyes gleaming with the promise of millions. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below about a time when justice was perfectly served in your life. I grew up in a small apartment on the wrong side of town. We never had much, but for a while, we had each other. My mother Carol worked as a waitress at a local diner, and my father Frank picked up construction jobs when he could. They weren't perfect parents, but in those early years they tried. There were bedtime stories and weekend picnics in the park when money was too tight for anything else. Everything changed when I was around 8. Mom lost her job after showing up late too many times. Dad started hanging around with a rougher crowd. The apartment grew messier and the refrigerator emptier. I learned to make my own lunches for school. Simple things at first, just peanut butter sandwiches and an apple if we had any. Then sometimes there wasn't even bread. By the time I was 10, I recognized the glazed look in their eyes when they would come home late, the hushed arguments about money, the strange people visiting our apartment at all hours, the paraphernalia they thought they hid well enough in their bedroom drawer. I became the one who made sure the bills got paid when they remembered to give me money for them. I learned which excuses worked best with the landlord when rent was late. School became my sanctuary. I threw myself into my studies, earning top grades despite my home situation. My teachers noticed, of course. Mrs. Patterson in 6th grade would sometimes slip extra food into my backpack when no one was looking. Mr. Jenkins, my math teacher, stayed after school to help me with homework because home wasn't a place for concentration anymore. Then came that Tuesday in April when I was 13. I remember the date so clearly. April 17th, a perfectly ordinary spring day. I walked home from school planning how to stretch the last few dollars in my emergency stash to buy some ramen noodles that could last a few days. My parents hadn't been home for 2 days, which wasn't unusual anymore, but when I put my key in the lock and pushed open the door, something felt different. The usual clutter was there, but something was missing. Their presence. I called out, hearing only silence in return. I walked through each room, finding drawers pulled open, their contents gone. Their toothbrushes missing from the bathroom. Most of their clothes gone from the closet. On the kitchen counter, weighted down by a nearly empty bottle of vodka, was a note scrawled on the back of an overdue electric bill. "Penny, we need some space. Got an opportunity we can't pass up. We'll be back soon. There's $20 in the sugar jar. Mom and Dad." $20. That's what my childhood was worth to them. I checked the sugar jar. There was $5, not 20. I told myself they would be back in a few days. They had disappeared before, but never longer than a weekend. But days turned into a week, then 2. I rationed the food, only eating one small meal a day. I still went to school afraid that missing classes would alert authorities and somehow get me in trouble. I washed my clothes in the bathtub with dish soap when they got too dirty. I unplugged everything except the refrigerator to save on electricity. After 3 weeks, Mrs. Goldstein from next door knocked on my door. She had noticed my parents' absence and my increasingly gaunt appearance. I broke down in her kitchen over a bowl of homemade soup that was the first proper meal I'd had in days. She called social services. The social worker, Ms. Thompson, was kind but straightforward. My parents had crossed state lines, according to a convenience store clerk who recognized their photo from 2 states over. They had been buying bus tickets heading further west. They hadn't used their cell phones, hadn't accessed their bank accounts. It was as if they had wanted to disappear completely, to disappear from me. As Ms. Thompson explained my options, her voice gentle but her words devastating, I felt something break inside me. Not just sadness, but a fundamental betrayal that altered how I viewed the world. My parents hadn't just left me. They had planned it, packed for it, chosen it. They had looked at their 13-year-old daughter and decided she was an acceptable loss. There was no family on my mother's side. Her parents had died before I was born, and she was an only child. My father's parents were also deceased, victims of a car accident 5 years earlier. That left only one option: my father's brother, a man I had met exactly twice in my life. Uncle William. "We've located your father's brother," Ms. Thompson told me as we sat in her cluttered office at Family Services. "William Walker. He lives about 3 hours from here." I barely remembered Uncle William. He had come to a Christmas dinner once when I was very young, bringing expensive gifts and creating tension with my father. The second time was at my grandparents' funeral, where he and my father had gotten into a heated argument outside the church. All I knew was that he was wealthy, lived alone, and had little contact with our side of the family. "He's agreed to meet with us tomorrow, Ms." Thompson continued studying my face for a reaction. "He's your only living relative, so we're required to explore that option before considering foster placement." The next day, I sat in Miss Thompson's car as we pulled up to an imposing gated entrance. After she spoke into an intercom, the tall iron gate swung open, revealing a long tree-lined driveway leading to what I could only describe as a mansion. It was an enormous stone house with perfectly manicured grounds, a fountain in the circular driveway, and multiple luxury cars parked near the entrance. "Remember," Ms. Thompson said gently, "he may just need time to adjust to the idea. Try not to get discouraged if he seems hesitant at first." William Walker opened the door himself, rather than the household staff I had imagined would exist in such a place. He was tall like my father, but much fitter, with the same dark hair now threaded with distinguished silver at the temples. He wore an expensive-looking sweater and slacks that probably cost more than all the clothes I had ever owned combined. "Please come in," he said, his voice deep and formal. His eyes, so similar to my father's, assessed me quickly before turning to Ms. Thompson. "I've prepared some tea in the study." The inside of the house was even more impressive than the exterior. High ceilings artwork that looked like it belonged in a museum furniture that no one in my previous life would have been allowed to sit on. We followed him through wide hallways to a wood-paneled study lined with books. "So," he said after awkward introductions and tea had been served, "Frank and Carol have truly disappeared." The way he said my parents' names carried years of complicated history. "We have reason to believe they left the state voluntarily," Ms. Thompson explained. "They've made no contact with Penelope in over 3 weeks now." Uncle William's expression tightened. "Typical," he muttered, then seemed to remember I was in the room. "I apologize, Penelope. That was inappropriate." "It's okay," I said, finding my voice. "You're not wrong." Something shifted in his expression. The hint of a smile, perhaps. For the first time, he really looked at me. "You have your grandmother's eyes," he said quietly. Ms. Thompson outlined what taking me in would entail: legal guardianship, school enrollment, medical authorization. Uncle William asked thoughtful, practical questions while I sat silently, feeling like a burden being negotiated. "I travel frequently for business," he said, frowning. "I have no experience with teenagers. My home isn't exactly child-friendly." "I don't need much," I blurted out. "I can cook and clean. I'm quiet. I get good grades. I won't be any trouble." The room fell silent. I realized I was essentially trying to sell myself like a used car with good features but high mileage. The thought made my throat tighten with humiliation. Uncle William's expression softened unexpectedly. "That's not. You shouldn't have to." He cleared his throat and turned to Ms. Thompson. "I'll need a few days to make arrangements. Will the end of the week be acceptable for her to move in?" 2 days later, I arrived at Uncle William's mansion with everything I owned packed into one suitcase and a backpack. A housekeeper named Maria showed me to a bedroom larger than our entire apartment had been. It had its own bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in, a walk-in closet, and a window seat overlooking the expansive gardens. "Mr. Walker requested that you join him for dinner at 6:30, Maria informed me with a kind smile. "The dining room is downstairs, first door past the grand staircase." Dinner was a silent, formal affair. We sat at opposite ends of a table that could have seated 20, eating food prepared by a personal chef that I was too nervous to fully appreciate. Uncle William asked a few polite questions about my schooling and whether my room was satisfactory. I answered as briefly as possible, terrified of saying the wrong thing. "I've enrolled you in Westfield Academy," he said as dessert was served. "It's an excellent private school nearby. You'll start on Monday. I've arranged for a car to take you." I nearly choked on my chocolate mousse. Private school, I can't. I don't have the right clothes or supplies or all taken care of, he said dismissively. A personal shopper will bring selections tomorrow for you to choose from. Maria will help you. The first weeks were a strange adjustment. Uncle William left early each morning for his offices downtown, where I learned he ran a successful tech company he had built from the ground up. He returned late most evenings, and our interactions remained formal and brief. The house felt enormous and empty during the day when I returned from school, despite the occasional presence of staff. Westfield Academy was unlike any school I'd ever attended. The other students wore designer clothes and talked about summer homes and family vacations to Europe. I felt like an alien who had landed on a different planet despite my new wardrobe and Uncle William's obvious wealth. But slowly things began to change between us. It started with a book. I had discovered the library in the East Wing, a two-story room with more books than I had ever seen outside a public library. One evening, Uncle William found me curled up with a dog-eared copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. That was my favorite as a boy, he said, surprising me, a story of betrayal and ultimate justice. I like that he reinvents himself, I said carefully, that he doesn't let what happened to him define his whole life. Something changed in Uncle William's eyes. He sat down in the leather chair opposite mine, and for the first time we had a real conversation. About books then, about school, then cautiously about my adjustment to my new life. As October turned to November, our evening conversations in the library became more frequent. I learned that Uncle William had taught himself coding as a teenager, building his first successful app before he was 20. He learned that I loved mathematics and science, but struggled with French. Sometimes we would work side by side him on his laptop, reviewing company reports, me on my homework. The real turning point came at Thanksgiving. I had assumed Uncle William would have elaborate plans, perhaps a business dinner or travel abroad. Instead, he awkwardly asked if I would mind staying home for the holiday. "We could have a proper dinner here," he suggested, "unless you prefer to do something else." That Thanksgiving, to the obvious surprise of his household staff, Uncle William attempted to cook. The turkey was slightly overdone, the gravy lumpy, but it was the most meaningful meal I'd had in years. He told stories about my grandparents that I'd never heard, showing me a side of my family history that had been kept from me. "Your grandmother was brilliant with numbers," he said, smiling at a memory. "She never finished college because women of her generation often didn't, but she could calculate complex figures in her head faster than most accountants. You remind me of her." As we finished pumpkin pie that Maria had wisely prepared in advance, Uncle William cleared his throat. "Penelope, I've been thinking. The guardianship arrangement is temporary, legally speaking. I'd like to make it permanent if you're amenable. This would be your home, not just a place you're staying." I couldn't speak around the sudden lump in my throat. I just nodded, tears spilling down my cheeks. "Good," he said gruffly, clearly emotional himself, though trying to hide it. "That's settled then." That December, the enormous house was decorated for Christmas for the first time in years, according to Maria. Uncle William and I selected a 12-foot tree for the main hall, and he actually climbed the ladder himself to place the star on top despite his designer clothes and the household staff hovering nervously below. On Christmas morning, I found not just presents under the tree, but a stocking with my name embroidered on it hanging from the mantel. Inside was a small velvet box containing a delicate silver necklace with a pendant shaped like an open book. "It was my mother's," Uncle William said quietly. "Your grandmother's. I thought you should have it now." I realized then that Uncle William hadn't just taken me in out of family obligation. He had chosen to become my family. And for the first time since finding that note in our empty apartment, I felt like I belonged somewhere again. The transition from abandoned teenager to privileged heiress wasn't seamless. While Uncle William provided everything I could materially need, we both had to learn how to create a family from scratch. He had lived alone for decades, set in his ways and accustomed to his privacy. I had spent years being hypervigilant, independent out of necessity rather than choice. We both had to adjust. Westfield Academy eventually became less intimidating as I found my place there. My academic performance quickly distinguished me, earning respect from teachers and eventually peers. I joined the debate team and discovered I had a talent for constructing logical arguments and thinking on my feet. Uncle William never missed a competition, sitting in the front row, with an expression of unmistakable pride that still makes me emotional when I remember it. "You argued that case better than some lawyers I know," he told me after I won a regional championship in my sophomore year. Coming from him, it was the highest praise. There were still hard times, nightmares about being abandoned again, panic attacks when Uncle William traveled for business despite his always calling at the same time each evening and providing detailed itineraries. Trust, once broken so completely, doesn't heal in a straight line. On my 16th birthday, Uncle William surprised me with two gifts. The first was a car, a sensible but luxury model with top safety ratings. The second was a stack of legal papers. "What are these?" I asked, flipping through documents filled with legal terminology. "Adoption papers," he said, watching me carefully. "If you want, of course. You're old enough now that your consent is required. You don't have to decide immediately." I didn't need time. "Yes," I said immediately, tears filling my eyes. "Yes, I want that." The adoption was finalized 3 months later. I became Penelope Walker legally, though I had felt like a Walker in my heart since that first Christmas. My parents' parental rights were terminated in absentia, their continued absence and lack of contact, making the legal process straightforward. Not once in all these years did I receive so much as a birthday card from Carol and Frank. No phone calls, no emails, no messages passed through mutual acquaintances. It was as if they had stepped into another dimension, one where they had never had a daughter at all. Uncle William, now legally just William on the adoption papers, but Dad in my heart, and increasingly in our private conversations, had hired investigators during those first few years. They had tracked my parents to Arizona, then Nevada, living in various motels and continuing their nomadic drug-fueled existence. "Do you want no more?" William had asked when I was 17, the latest investigator's report in his hand. I shook my head. "They made their choice," I said simply. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something manageable, a scar rather than an open wound. My high school graduation was a milestone that William celebrated with characteristic thoughtfulness and uncharacteristic exuberance. He rented out my favorite restaurant for a party, inviting my friends, teachers, and the household staff, who had become extended family. "I am so proud of you," he said in a toast that left few dry eyes in the room. "Not just for your achievements, impressive as they are, but for the person you've become despite the challenges you've faced. You have turned hardship into strength, betrayal into wisdom." When college acceptance letters arrived, William insisted I choose based on the program rather than cost or location. I selected Georgetown University's pre-law program, inspired by a growing interest in family law and advocacy for children in situations like mine had been. "Law school after that?" William asked when I told him my choice. "If I can get in," I replied. He smiled, that confident smile I had come to trust implicitly. "You can accomplish anything you set your mind to, Penelope. Never doubt that." College years meant less time at home, but our bond remained unbreakable. William flew to Washington, D.C. monthly, ostensibly for business meetings, but always including dinner with me in his itinerary. I came home for holidays and summers working as an intern at legal aid clinics. William helped me find connections with. Law school followed just as he had predicted. Yale Law, where I specialized in family law and child advocacy, graduating with honors, that William celebrated with characteristic pride and uncharacteristic tears during the ceremony. It was during my final year of law school that William's health began to show signs of strain. Always fit and energetic despite his advancing years, he suddenly seemed to have less stamina. He brushed off my concerns, blaming long hours at work and normal aging. "Just promise me you'll see a doctor," I insisted during one of our weekly phone calls. "I promise," he said, and I learned later he had kept that promise, receiving a diagnosis he chose not to share with me until after my graduation and bar exam. Heart disease advanced and complicated by a congenital condition that had gone undetected. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I demanded. When he finally revealed the truth, medical reports spread across his home office desk. "You needed to focus on your future," he said simply. "My health issues shouldn't derail your momentum." Then, for the next year, I split my time between my new position at a prestigious law firm in Boston and trips home to support William through treatments and procedures. He fought hard following doctors' orders with the same discipline he applied to business problems. For a while, it seemed to be working. Then came the call that changed everything again. Maria, her voice breaking with emotion, telling me to come home immediately. William had collapsed at the office. By the time I arrived at the hospital, he was gone. A massive heart attack, mercifully quick, the doctor said. The world tilted on its axis for the second time in my life. The first abandonment had been by choice, cruel and deliberate. This one was by fate equally devastating, but wrapped in 15 years of love and care that gave me the strength to stand when grief threatened to buckle my knees. William had prepared meticulously for this possibility, of course. Everything was in order from funeral arrangements to business succession plans. That was his way, always thinking ahead, always protecting me in any way he could. What neither of us had prepared for was who would show up at the reading of his will. The day of the will reading dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect autumn day that William had loved. The kind of day we would have spent walking through the gardens together, planning spring plantings, or discussing my latest case. I dressed in a black suit that he had complimented, once drawing strength from the memory. 1 month since his death, and the pain remained raw and constant. The house felt cavernous without his presence, each room haunted by memories of our life together. Only the knowledge that he would want me to continue the legacy he had helped me build kept me functioning. Mr. Harrison Williams' attorney and friend for over 30 years had scheduled the will reading for 2 o'clock at his downtown office. I arrived early, needing time to compose myself before facing the small group of people William had considered important in his life. His business partners Thomas and James, Maria, and our groundskeeper George, who had been with William since before I arrived. A few longtime friends. I was sitting in the elegant reception area, thumbing through emails on my phone without really seeing them when the front door of the law office opened. I glanced up automatically, then froze, my phone slipping from suddenly numb fingers. Walking toward the receptionist's desk were two people I hadn't seen in 15 years, but would recognize anywhere. Older, certainly. My father's hair now more gray than brown, deep lines etched around my mother's mouth. But unmistakably Carol and Frank Walker. They hadn't noticed me yet, speaking in low voices to the receptionist, while my mind raced to make sense of their presence. They were well-dressed, my mother in a conservative black dress, my father in a suit that looked recently purchased. Both appeared healthy, clear-eyed, sober. The receptionist pointed in my direction, and they turned their eyes, widening as they recognized me. My mother's hand flew to her mouth in what appeared to be genuine shock. My father recovered first, his expression shifting to an unconvincing smile. "Penny," he said, moving toward me with his arms outstretched, as if for an embrace I had no intention of offering. "Look at you, all grown up." I stood grateful for the extra inches my heels provided for the tailored suit that armor-like reminded me of who I had become. "What are you doing here?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears, frigidly polite. "We're family," my mother said, stepping forward. She had aged better than my father, her blonde hair now highlighted expertly rather than from a box dye. "We came as soon as we heard about William." "Family." I repeated the word, tasting bitter. "That's an interesting interpretation." An awkward silence fell. They exchanged glances, the kind of wordless communication long-term couples develop. "We know we have a lot to explain," my father said finally. "We've been through a lot, made mistakes, but we've been clean for 7 years now. We wanted to reach out so many times. Then why didn't you?" The question that had haunted my childhood escaped before I could contain it. "We didn't think you'd want to hear from us," my mother said, her voice small. "After what we did, we figured William had probably poisoned you against us anyway." "William never spoke ill of you," I said, the lie necessary to protect his memory from their assumptions. In truth, he had been remarkably restrained when discussing them, focusing instead on helping me process my feelings, rather than imposing his own justified anger. Mr. Harrison's assistant appeared before the conversation could continue. "Ms. Walker, everyone has arrived. We're ready to begin." I nodded, collecting my purse and phone. "Excuse me," I said to the strangers who had once been my parents. "We're here for the reading, too," my father said, placing a hand on my arm that I immediately shook off. William was my brother. The assistant looked uncertain. "I don't have them on the attendance list, Ms. Walker." "It's fine," I said tightly. "Better to have this confrontation in a controlled environment with witnesses than risking them showing up at the house later. They can attend." We were led to a handsomely appointed conference room. The assembled group looked up as we entered, curious glances at the two strangers accompanying me. Thomas, who had known William longest, recognized them immediately, his expression darkening. "Frank," he said coldly. "Didn't expect to see you here." My father nodded uncomfortably. "Thomas, it's been a long time." Everyone took seats around the polished table, my parents choosing chairs, directly across from me. I could feel their eyes on me throughout Mr. Harrison's preliminary remarks, studying me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Before we begin," Mr. Harrison said, placing a thick folder on the table. William was very specific about the proceedings today. He anticipated certain scenarios and prepared accordingly. His eyes flickered briefly toward my parents. My mother leaned forward, a brittle smile on her face. "We're just here to pay our respects. Families should be together at times like these." Several people around the table shifted uncomfortably. Maria, sitting beside me, reached over to squeeze my hand beneath the table. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "Let's proceed with the reading, shall we? William's will is quite straightforward in most regards, though there are some special provisions." He began with the standard legal preamble, then moved on to specific bequests. Generous sums to longtime staff including Maria and George. Donations to William's favorite charities and educational institutions. Business shares distributed among partners with provisions for continued operations. Throughout the reading, I noticed my parents growing increasingly restless. My mother's artificial smile had faded. My father checked his watch repeatedly. Their eyes lit up when Mr. Harrison announced he was moving on to family provisions. Now, regarding the bulk of the estate, including the primary residence investment portfolios and remaining business interests. Mr. Harrison continued, his voice neutral, but his eyes sharp. My father sat up straighter, a small smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. My mother's hand found his on the tabletop, squeezing with barely contained excitement. "Before I proceed, I have been instructed to address a specific circumstance," Mr. Harrison said, reaching into his briefcase and extracting a sealed envelope. "William left explicit instructions that should Frank and Carol Walker appear at this reading, I am to open this envelope before continuing." My parents exchanged confused glances as Mr. Harrison broke the seal and removed several documents and what appeared to be a USB drive. William also recorded a video message to be played in this scenario, Mr. Harrison explained, nodding to his assistant, who wheeled in a television on a stand and connected the USB drive. William's face appeared on the screen, recorded in his home office, perhaps 6 months before his death. He looked tired but determined, his eyes clear and focused. My throat tightened at the sight of him so alive in this digital ghost. "If you're viewing this," William began, "then Frank and Carol have made an appearance at my will reading." "Hello, brother." His tone sharpened on these last words. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "It's been many years since we've spoken," William continued. "Not since you abandoned your 13-year-old daughter and disappeared. I wonder what has prompted your return now. Could it be the obituary in the national papers, mentioning the substantial Walker fortune? Your timing is, as always, transparently self-serving." My mother's smile had completely vanished now. "What you may not know," William continued, "is that I've had investigators tracking your movements periodically over the years. Not for reconciliation purposes, but to ensure you never attempted to disrupt the new life Penelope and I built together." William's image leaned forward slightly. "Let me be clear. You left behind a traumatized child who had to learn to trust again, who cried herself to sleep for months, who flinched at sudden movements and hoarded food in her room because she was afraid of being left without resources again. The damage you inflicted was profound and lasting." My eyes burned with unshed tears as William articulated the pain I had worked so hard to overcome. Yet Penelope persevered. She graduated at the top of her high school class, excelled at Georgetown and Yale Law, became not only a brilliant attorney, but a compassionate advocate for children in situations like the one you created for her. She did all this not because of you, but despite you. William's expression softened briefly when he spoke about me, then hardened again as he addressed my parents. I know exactly why you're here today, and it has nothing to do with family reconciliation. The investigators found you living comfortably in San Diego 4 years ago. No longer addicted based on surveillance, but making no effort whatsoever to contact your daughter. You had the means and opportunity for years, yet chose not to reach out until there was financial incentive. My father's face had flushed an angry red. My mother stared at her hands now twisted together on the table. Mr. Harrison, William continued, please distribute the documentation from the envelope now. Mr. Harrison passed copies of several documents around the table. What you're receiving, William explained from the screen, is evidence of Frank and Carol Walker's history of attempting to extract money from family members. The first document shows their attempt to defraud my parents' Penelope's grandparents by claiming fictional medical expenses. The second shows bank records of them emptying Penelope's college fund money my parents had set aside for her mere weeks before they abandoned her. Murmurs circulated around the table as people reviewed the evidence. I stared at the bank statements, seeing for the first time documentation of yet another betrayal. And finally, William said, you'll find legal records of the termination of their parental rights and my formal adoption of Penelope when she was 16. In the eyes of the law, as well as in my heart, Penelope is my daughter. Frank and Carol Walker are legal strangers to her by their choice first, and then by court decree. William's image smiled sadly. I regret not being there to see your faces as this is revealed. I imagine the same transparent greed that has motivated your entire lives is now transforming into the realization that you've miscalculated badly. He paused. Mr. Harrison, you may now proceed with the actual terms of my will regarding my family. The video ended, leaving a stunned silence in the conference room. All eyes moved between my parents and me. My father's face had drained of color, while my mother's eyes had narrowed calculatingly. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. As per William Walker's last will and testament, the entirety of his remaining estate, including all properties, financial holdings, and business interests not otherwise specifically bequeathed, is left to his daughter, Penelope Walker. The silence that followed Mr. Harrison's announcement stretched for several heartbeats. Thomas and James exchanged satisfied glances. Maria smiled through tears. My father was the first to break the silence, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. This is ridiculous, he snapped. William was clearly not in his right mind. I'm his brother, his only blood relative besides Penelope. There must be some provision for me. Mr. Harrison's expression remained professionally neutral. There is not. William was quite clear and of completely sound mind when this will was prepared and updated regularly over the last decade. My mother leaned forward, her voice taking on a sympathetic tone that rang utterly false. Penny, honey, you can see how unfair this is, can't you? We're your parents. We made mistakes, terrible ones, but we've changed. We deserve a second chance. Families forgive each other. The audacity nearly took my breath away. You're not my family, I said quietly. You haven't been for 15 years? Blood is blood, my father insisted, glancing at the other people in the room as if seeking allies. Whatever legal mumbo-jumbo William arranged, you're still our daughter. Mr. Harrison placed another document on the table. Actually, Mr. Walker, I have here the court records from Penelope's adoption. Your parental rights were legally terminated after you abandoned her and made no contact for over 2 years. The court determined your abandonment was complete and willful, making you unfit parents. We were sick, my mother interjected, tears suddenly appearing in her eyes. Tears I recognized from childhood as tactical rather than genuine. Addiction is a disease. We couldn't help ourselves. And yet you appear to have helped yourselves to Penelope's college fund before disappearing, Thomas said dryly, tapping the bank records William had provided. My father's strategy shifted abruptly. We'll contest the will, he declared, looking directly at me. We have rights. William manipulated a vulnerable child against her own parents. We can prove undue influence. Mr. Harrison actually smiled slightly at this. You're welcome to try, Mr. Walker. However, I should inform you that William anticipated this reaction as well. The will has been structured to be virtually contest-proof, with multiple witnesses to his mental competence, including several physicians and psychological evaluations. Additionally, should you pursue legal action, you trigger a special clause. He turned a page in the will document. Any legal challenge brought by Frank or Carol Walker activates the creation of the William Walker Family Justice Foundation, which will provide free legal representation to children abandoned by their parents. The foundation will use your case as its first public example, with all details of your abandonment of Penelope made available to the media. My mother's face paled. You wouldn't, she whispered, looking at me. You wouldn't humiliate us publicly. I wouldn't have to, I replied calmly. You've done that to yourselves. My father stood suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is extortion. You can't threaten us like this. It's not a threat, Mr. Walker, Mr. Harrison said, his voice still professionally even. It's simply a condition of the will. You're free to challenge it, but the consequences have been clearly outlined by the deceased. After everything we've been through to get our lives back on track, my mother said, her voice rising, you'd destroy us, your own parents. Something in me snapped at her, continued insistence on a relationship that they had severed, not me. You were never concerned about destroying me, I said, rising to my feet. A 13-year-old girl left alone with no money, no family, no safety net. Did you ever once call to make sure I wasn't dead? Did you ever check if I had food or a place to sleep or if I'd been put in foster care? For the first time, genuine shame flickered across my mother's face. My father, however, only hardened. We're entitled to something, he insisted. William had obligations to family. William fulfilled his obligations to family, I said firmly. He became my family when you chose not to be. We made a mistake, my father shouted, drawing concerned looks from everyone at the table. People deserve second chances. Second chances are earned through genuine remorse and changed behavior, I replied, my legal training keeping my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside. You've demonstrated neither. You're here for money, not reconciliation. Mr. Harrison stood, signaling to his assistant. I believe we're finished with the official reading. Ms. Walker, we can discuss next steps for the estate transfer at your convenience. Everyone else, thank you for your attendance. My father made a move toward me, but Thomas and James immediately stood, creating a barrier between us. I think it's time for you to leave, Frank, Thomas said quietly. This isn't over, my father hissed, grabbing my mother's arm. We have rights. We'll get what's coming to us. As they were escorted toward the door by Mr. Harrison's security personnel, my mother turned back. For a brief moment, I thought I saw genuine regret in her eyes. Penny, she said softly. My name is Penelope, I corrected her, the childhood nickname now feeling like an invasion coming from her lips. Penelope Walker. After they were gone, the room exhaled collectively. Maria hugged me tightly, and Thomas placed a fatherly hand on my shoulder. William would have been proud of how you handled that, he said quietly. He prepared me well, I replied, blinking back tears. Mr. Harrison approached with a glass of water. They may still attempt legal action despite the consequences, he warned. Some people can't help themselves when money is involved. I know, I said, and if they do, we'll create the foundation William envisioned. Some good should come from their selfishness. As everyone began to disperse, I remained seated, looking at the now blank television screen where William's face had been. In his final act, he had protected me once again, anticipating the return of the people who had hurt me most and ensuring they could not do so again. The love in that level of foresight was overwhelming. Thomas paused at the door. Will you be all right? I nodded, finding a smile. Yes, William made sure of that in every way possible. As I gathered my things to leave, I thought about the stark contrast between the two types of family represented in that room today. The family of blood who had walked away when things became difficult, and the family of choice who had stood by me through everything. William had taught me which one truly mattered. In the weeks following the will reading, I waited for the threatened legal challenge from my biological parents. Mr. Harrison kept me updated on their movements, their consultation with several attorneys, all of whom apparently gave them the same advice. The will was ironclad, and pursuing a challenge would only result in public embarrassment and financial loss. Eventually, a single letter arrived from my mother postmarked from Arizona. Her handwriting was neater than I remembered, the paper expensive. "Penelope," she wrote, "I won't make excuses for what Frank and I did. There aren't any that would matter now. I just want you to know that I think about the girl we left behind every day, and I'm sorry we missed seeing the remarkable woman you've become. If you ever want to talk, my number is below. Carol." I placed the letter in a drawer without responding. Perhaps someday I would feel differently. But for now, this attempt at connection felt 15 years too late and motivated by the wrong reasons. True to form, my father made one last desperate attempt, filing a petition with the court that was quickly dismissed. Mr. Harrison called to inform me that Frank had violated the terms triggering the creation of the foundation William had outlined. "Would you like to proceed?" Mr. Harrison asked gently. I took a deep breath. Yes, William wanted his legacy to help others. Let's honor that wish. And so, the William Walker Foundation for Child Advocacy was born. Using a portion of my inheritance, we established a legal aid organization specifically focused on representing children who had been abandoned or neglected. My background in family law made me the natural choice to oversee its development, and I found unexpected healing in transforming my own trauma into a force for positive change. We opened our first office in Boston, where I continued my legal practice. Within 2 years, we had expanded to 3 additional cities, providing representation to children who might otherwise have no voice in the legal system. Each success story, each child placed in a loving home, or reunited with genuinely rehabilitated parents, felt like a tribute to William and the second chance he had given me. The foundation also became a platform for education and policy advocacy. I found myself speaking at conferences, consulting on legislation, and eventually teaching a course at Boston University on the legal rights of minors. My personal story, shared selectively and purposefully, gave weight to my professional expertise. In my personal life, I continued the process of healing that William had helped begin. Therapy had been a constant companion throughout my adult years, helping me process both the original abandonment and now the grief of losing William. It wasn't always a straight path forward. There were still nights when old insecurities would surface, when the fear of being left behind would wake me from sleep. But there was progress too. 3 years after William's death, I met David, an architectural engineer with kind eyes and infinite patience. On our third date, I told him my full story, watching carefully for his reaction. The compassion I saw there, without pity or judgment, told me this was someone worth trusting. 2 years later, we were married in the gardens of what was now my home, the house where William had given me a second chance at family. He would have approved, Maria told me at the reception, her eyes damp with happy tears. I never heard from my father again after his failed legal challenge. My mother sent occasional cards for birthdays and holidays, which I acknowledged with brief, polite responses. The chasm of 15 years was too wide to bridge with greeting cards, and I had no desire to attempt a deeper reconciliation. The family I had built for myself, both chosen and created, fulfilled me completely. 5 years after William's death, David and I welcomed our son into the world, William Thomas Walker. Davis had his namesake's thoughtful eyes, and as he grew, the same deliberate way of considering problems before speaking. Becoming a parent myself gave me new perspective on what my biological parents had thrown away so carelessly, and deepened my appreciation for the gift William had given me by stepping into that role. Looking at my life now, 10 years after that confrontation in Mr. Harrison's office, I'm struck by how different things might have been without William's intervention. Not just his material support, though, that opened doors that would have remained closed to a girl from my background, but his emotional investment. His belief in me when I was still learning to believe in myself. His commitment to being the parent I needed when those who should have filled that role chose to walk away. I've learned that family isn't defined by blood, but by presence, by showing up day after day through difficulties and celebrations, by building trust through consistent action, rather than appealing to biological obligation. William taught me that lesson through his example, and it's one I strive to honor in my own parenting and in the work our foundation does every day. The scars of abandonment never fully disappear. There are still moments when insecurity whispers that I'm not enough, that I'm unworthy of the love I've found. But those whispers grow fainter with each passing year, drowned out by the evidence to the contrary, by my husband's steady love, by my son's unquestioning trust, by the legacy William left not just in material wealth, but in showing me what true family means. If you're watching this and struggling with your own family trauma, please know that your past doesn't define your future. The family you create, whether through blood or choice, can heal wounds you thought would pain you forever. The William Walker Foundation now has a presence in 12 cities across the country, and we're here to help if you need us. I'd love to hear your stories of chosen family or how you've overcome difficult beginnings. Please like, subscribe, and share this video if it resonated with you. Every share helps someone else who might be feeling alone know that chosen family can be the strongest kind. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the family we find matters more than the family we're born into.